want to start off this video with a clearly articulated foundation. Human beings on a fundamental level pursue an ever-changing set of societal beauty standards. This cultural truth has persisted since the dawn of the human race. It can be seen throughout history and will inevitably continue infinitely into the future as long as we are alive. But for some reason, in the contemporary social landscape, this has become a concept that is now associated with sexist or misogynistic ideals. To be clear, I am not saying that the pursuit of current beauty standards is misogynistic. That would be decidedly untrue. What I am saying is that there is a sect of the population that perceives it to be, and attempts to manufacture outrage using any and all methods available to them. I actually just had a pretty interesting conversation about this topic with a streamer on Twitter. The idea that there are in fact definable standards in place on a social and physical level that dictate whether or not one is attractive. And while there is an abundance of truth in the age-old phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, to be sure, there are also broader and more easily outlined parameters that exist because of modern social dynamics and biology. Here's an example. Centuries ago, British aristocrats would wear powdered wigs. This trend originated from a practical desire to avoid showing the signs, which often came in the form of sores on the head and baldness, of a venereal disease called syphilis. However, over time, the practicality became a secondary motivation, and large, perfumed, overly dramatic wigs became a social symbol. The wigs were now a costly method of raising one's appeal and had more to do with vanity than practicality in a lot of different circumstances. Those that could afford a wig in cultures where they were prominent at least and cared to any significant degree about social status or being perceived in a positive light, as outlined by the current standards, would purchase and wear one, thus altering their appearance to conform to a set of criteria that, at the time, were considered to be appealing. Examples of this, as time has passed over the years, have done nothing but multiply. Nowadays, we have teeth whitening, Botox, plastic surgery, and so much more. The standards of what is socially acceptable or preferred have changed, yes, but the concept of altering oneself to fit contemporary trends or standards has not changed. Here is where we now look at Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk as a universe is dominated by technology. As technology advances, already proven by our own historical patterns, the relative cost of goods and services declines. As the number of beauty-enhancing procedures and augmentations increases at a near exponential level, the relative barrier of entry to obtain them is reduced, and in a futuristic world, whatever beauty standards exist, and exist they shall, they will be heavily pursued by a massive chunk of the population if they possess the means to do so. This brings us to the Cyberpunk 2077 gameplay footage that has now been called into question and labeled as sexist, misogynistic, and unacceptable, particularly focusing on their usage of nudity, with an emphasis on that nudity being a perpetuation of current sexist imagery and ideals. In an interview, game director Adam Badowski had this to say. Nudity is important for us because of one reason, Badowski said. This is cyberpunk, so people augment their body. So the body is no longer sacrum, sacred. It's profanum, profane, because people modify everything. They are losing their connection to the body, to the meat, and that's why we need to use the nudity in many situations. You see that there are bodies in the tub, and you need to take care of this woman, but at the same time, she is augmented, he continued, searching for the right words. She is not clean. Maybe she is augmented too much. Maybe the humanity level is pretty low in her, so it's an interesting topic. It's one of the key themes in Cyberpunk. The very first scenes in the original Ghost in the Shell anime show exactly the same aspect, because where is sacrum and where is profanum in a world when you can simply modify yourself to such limits that it makes you a different kind of person? It's one of the most important themes in Cyberpunk as a genre. His explanation is that nudity is an essential tool while they explore the topic of transhumanism, or the possibility of using scientific and technological advances to progress past the limitations of our physical organic bodies. He also makes it clear that there will be a focus on the concept of sacred or profane use of such augmentations, and that the balance of humanity, weighed against the technology of this futuristic world, will be a key point of that discussion. This seems like a perfectly fine explanation to me, at least on a personal level, but to some it was far from acceptable. I'm going to now read a thread that gained a surprising amount of traction on Twitter and sums up a lot of the outrage quite nicely. Here it is. This is like a fucking turducken of facile takes, genre ignorance, and milquetoast body squeamishness, which is maybe not ideal from the makers of a game literally called Cyberpunk. Like, first of all, stop pretending that your boner went to college. I promise you that your audience for the Cyber Guy game is not scandalized by a titty, and your boner must have slept through Intro to Lit because that is not what the sacred and the profane are. Fucking searching for the right words. She, is dirty and wrong because her body is non-factory parts. She is bad and scary, but also you have to protect her. Yeah, nailed that answer. Money changed hands for these doofuses to write a cyberpunk game. For Christ's sakes, there is nothing cyber nor punk about Luddite body puritanism. What on earth drew you to this subgenre? Are y'all lost? To say the introduction of technology into the body makes you less human and that's a very cyberpunk idea is like saying science fiction is about how scientists are dastardly eggheads who want to rule us all. What on earth are you talking about? One of the biggest fucking theses of cyberpunk is that technology is an extension of the human body and it's inevitable that it should come home to roost and that what counts is the body is open to interpretation. Did you even watch Ghost in the Shell? This, to me, is absurd. The most important thing to bring up ties back into the original pen and paper tabletop version of Cyberpunk. Within the Cyberpunk universe, and displayed as a component in the tabletop version many years ago, there is a humanity stat. This is adjusted with every cybernetic enhancement. Modify oneself too much and a sickness called cyberpsychosis sets in, which will drive a person mad, and it's associated with a complete loss of their humanity. The idea that a woman in a tub may be human or not is not unrealistic when the possibility of over-gluttonous augmentation leading to complete psychosis is very much a reality. How exactly Cyberpunk 2077 chooses to tackle these topics is as of yet unknown, but the outrage displayed in this thread is incontrovertibly unnecessary. To go further here, Anita Sarkeesian, a high-profile feminist media critic, highlighted this thread and used it as a call to participate, very pointedly asking if she could consult on Cyberpunk 2077 because she believes it is going to need her before the whole of the internet drags it for what sounds like potentially sexist representations. Keep in mind, this is the same Anita Sarkeesian brought into BioWare during the development of Anthem, and they were not happy about it. Also, Anthem. There are many different examples that echo this sentiment. An older one, but quite clear in its articulation, reads as follows from a user on the GameSpot forums. Is CD Projekt Red the most sexist game company of all time? I'm saying yes, definitely. Just watching the gameplay footage for their new game Cyberpunk 2077, and within the first minutes of the 45-minute video, there is a naked woman. Not a fat old granny or any semblance of something you might find in the real world. No, a millennial-style hot skinny girl with big boobs and perfect features. Of course, it's one of the weirdest scenes I've ever seen, being asked to leer at this passed-out girl as part of an interactive story. Then she gets dressed into a thong and continues to look at herself in the mirror as one of her male superiors barks at her on the phone, and she smarmily, all CD Projekt Red characters are smarmy, agrees with every one thing he says and strokes his ego a little bit just because, well, he's the big man who's in charge, of course. This particular bit of outrage is at least direct in its claim. The game is sexist because the character who was displayed naked was attractive. That's essentially what it boils down to. This is where the outrage over Cyberpunk 2077 hits a resolute brick wall at full fucking speed. In a futuristic world where body augmentation is cheaper and more extensive than ever before, with the ingrained human tendency to try and conform to beauty standards, there is a higher probability that this woman, who is in trouble in the tub and naked, would conform to those futuristic beauty standards than not. In fact, she may be well advanced in her age, but cybernetic augmentations and surgeries have hidden that fact and maintained her physically attractive form. It is more reasonable to assume that the majority of citizens would have succumbed to the aggressive beauty standards and advertising pushed forth by the megacorporations, because it is profitable for them, than resisted it. Furthermore, if we reference this statement from art director Redeziuk, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, I'm probably not, we can see a perfect articulation of the influence that these demented companies hold over the cyberpunk world. Cyberpunk 2077 is a dystopian future where megacorporations dictate everything, Redeziuk said. They try to, and successfully, influence people's lives. They shove products down their throats. They create those very aggressive advertisements that use and abuse a lot of people's needs and instincts. So hypersexualization is apparent everywhere, and in our ads there are many examples of hypersexualized women, hypersexualized men, and hypersexualized people in between. This is all to show that much like in our modern world, hypersexualization in advertisements is just terrible. It was a conscious choice on our end to show that in this world, a world where you are a cyberpunk, a person fighting against corporations, that advertisement is what you're fighting against. This statement was in response to building concern over the use of transsexual imagery in the advertisements displayed in the world of Night City. Even when imagery is used as a communication method to show the influence of corrupt, profit-hungry corporations in a negative light, it is still used by overly sensitive viewers to spin up the outrage turbines that exist in a constant state of readiness. This is still not the full extent of the grasping outrage. In another thread that gained a notable amount of traction, user Cybersloth on Twitter expressed that the inherent xenophobia from past decades has bled through and is largely responsible for the high density of Japanese themes and imagery in the Cyberpunk universe. To be extremely clear here, Cybersloth was not, at least in my own personal view, attacking Cyberpunk in any way whatsoever. This was not a thread to decry the game itself as being xenophobic. It was more a historical analysis of sorts that displayed why the imagery is so prominent and how at the time xenophobia was responsible. I would propose that Japan is an obvious technological innovator in the space, so the presence of Japanese influence completely makes sense. But regardless of why or how, the association of xenophobia with Cyberpunk 2077 and the assertion that it has been misrepresenting other cultures is something that has grown far larger than it realistically should have. Rock Paper Shotgun had the following to say about the game in a recent article. I'm also increasingly concerned about Cyberpunk's handling of non-white cultures. Last year's Gamescom demo drew criticism for its clumsy and inauthentic presentation of a Latino character, and I'm not convinced that the Voodoo Boys are a step in the right direction. At one point, V, the player character, mockingly says, "And who are dem?" in response to Placid's pronunciation. I asked Tom, I don't think I'm going to pronounce that properly no matter what I try, so I'm just going to leave it out, if he was concerned they weren't treating certain cultures with enough respect. Obviously, we're paying a lot of attention to representing different groups respectfully. You know, there's always a risk. Of course, we have it in the back of our heads that we need to be careful about this. We are contacting different consultants to learn about specific groups, and our company has a variety of people with different beliefs. As for the animals, if you play through the game, you'll see that they're not mostly black people, it's mixed. This, yet again, is assigning the directive of never offend anyone or do anything that could be perceived as offensive to anyone at any time for any reason. And such a mindset is fundamentally damaging, not only to video games, but nearly all social interactions. This problem is something that may have once been rooted in a reasonable desire to impact meaningful change, but as the escalation has slowly taken place and the boundary expanded, the idea of removing offensive material has gone so far overboard, it seeks to preemptively cripple games based on what they might and might not say or show. The response to all of this social fragility, if you will, from Mike Pondsmith, the creator of the Cyberpunk universe, has been absolute. In the comment section of the Rock Paper Shotgun article, and in various other locations spread across the web, some viewers have begun to decry the game, insinuate that Mike Pondsmith isn't involved, else there would never have been the potential for such a racist or prejudicial narrative, and to this and all other outrage, he responded with the following. If I wasn't heavily involved, I would be able to get more done. As it is, I barely have a life. As for the animals, the whole freaking point is that they think of themselves as powerful, dangerous, wild animals. You'd have thought the lady named Sasquatch would have given them a clue. The original Voodoo Boys were a scathing commentary on cultural appropriation. I love the idea that real practitioners of Voodoo, I think that's how it's pronounced, moved in and took back their turf. And they even got the Creole right. Who the bleep do you think you are to tell me whether or not my creation was done right or not? He goes on to say at a later point, want to say this just once. I am really tired of well-meaning people on internet chat boards paternalistically telling me what I, as a black person, should be offended by. You want to be my ally? Go gird up your loins, and at this year's Thanksgiving dinner, have the nerve to tell your racist Uncle Bob to shut the fuck up for a change. This perfectly sums up the approach necessary to rally Cyberpunk 2077 through this wave of intolerably ignorant outrage, and it is wonderful to see the game and the artists behind it standing their ground. The idea that conforming to societal beauty standards is somehow misogynistic is ludicrous. The outrage over Cyberpunk 2077 is a paradox because the material stirring that outrage is designed to do exactly that within the framework of a video game narrative. But all that some of these journalists and viewers can see is something which could possibly be offensive in certain contexts, and they see red while trying to get it changed or stricken from existence. I myself am excited to see where Cyberpunk 2077 goes, and I'm thankful that it is pursuing artistic vision over social conformity. But that's it. Enough for today. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. And also, I want to make everyone aware of a charity event that the channel will be hosting to support veterans in need. There is no date for the event as of just yet. The goal is to hopefully collaborate with a couple of other channels and do something quite meaningful, but there is a lot of logistical planning to get through before that. I am able to sit in this chair in front of this screen and critique games or culture or outrage or whatever it may be because others have made it safe and outright possible for me to do so, which is deserving of recognition and support. So stay tuned for that over the coming weeks. That's it though. I'll cut it there and stop rambling. Thank you all for watching and have a nice night.